Hello, everybody, and thank you so much for joining this Ftrack webinar, Creative Collaboration in the Remote Era. My name is Ray Cuevas, and I am the art manager at Mountaintop Studios. I'm looking forward to today's really exciting discussion about an important topic, how creatives are adapting to the increasingly globalized nature of visual effects production. The visual effects industry has grown more worldwide for years, but in 2020, things have become more atomized. Projects are no longer just split across global studios, but distributed again among remote artists' homes. This presents a whole ton of challenges when it comes to organizing and delivering something as complex and mercurial as a visual effects heavy show. How can studios and their producers overcome the challenges remote workflows pose to their creative process? We're going to be answering those questions today. In a few moments, I'll let our speakers introduce themselves. They're three VFX producers with over 75 combined years of visual effects experience on everything from Bill and Tate Face the Music to Gladiator, Men in Black, Pirates of the Caribbean, Insidious, Legion, For All Mankind, Fringe, and more. Over the next 90 minutes, they will discuss how they've seen the visual effects industry evolve from an LA-centric model to a global work-from-home paradigm, and how workflows, tools, and technology are keeping projects and the people who make them united, even in this age of COVID lockdowns and separation. It's going to be a really fantastic discussion, charting the visual effects journey from brick and mortar to remote, and where we're going to go from there. Before we dive in and say hello, I'd like to quickly cover a few things about this webinar. The runtime is 90 minutes, so we'll end around 12:30 p.m. Pacific time. The chat function will be on and open throughout the webinar, so if you have any questions, please fire away. We'll have 10 minutes at the end where we'll pose some of the most popular questions to our speakers, so please don't be shy and post your questions. And finally, the webinar will be recorded and shared with all attendees. We'll send you a link once it's available. And that's it. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our three speakers today. First of all, we have Nancy St. John, who is a visual effects producer.
Hi.
She is. Next up, we have Barbara Jenikoff, who is also a VFX producer over at Sony Pictures Entertainment.
Hey, everybody.
And lastly, we have James Hatton, who is the founder of Vfx Legion.
Yeah, hello.
How's it going, everybody?
Very well, thanks.
Awesome. It's really great to have you all here today. So what I would like to do first is just give you a little bit of time for each of you to introduce yourselves, give us a little bit of your journey, what you've done, and how you got to where you are today. So how about we start with Nancy?
How many hours do we have? No, I'm just kidding. Well, I began my journey in visual effects pretty much around 84, 85. And I moved to LA, which was, of course, the center of all visual effects back at that time, and worked for a couple of really groundbreaking companies, Digital Productions and Robert Abel and Associates, and got my chops there, I would say. Then I moved up to PDI, Pacific Data Images, and worked there. Then ILM, where I ran the computer graphics group. And then I went off to the production side, the dark side, starting to work with studios and directors and producers. And once in a while, I've gone back in to a facility and helped build them or renovate them. But mostly sort of stuck to the production side. And you mentioned a few of my credits, but I'm very, very proud of Babe and Gladiator, iRobot. It goes on and on. Bill and Ted has been my latest, which I think is really relevant to this discussion because COVID hit the day after we actually previewed our first sort of cut of the movie.
Wow. And
then the challenge was how do you finish with all your facilities having to go remote. So anyway, that's my 35 years in a nutshell, and I'll let you go on to Barbara or James.
All right, Barbara, why don't you take it off?
I started working, I was head of production. I was a VFX producer and then eventually promoted to head of production at Zoic Studios. I was there for about 12 years. And then I decided to, as Nancy says, go to the dark side. I just saw kind of the industry changing, and my personal interests were kind of to be more a part of the show and their process. And there was a real need at the time. So about 2 years ago, I left and I produced season 3 of Legion for FX, and then moved directly on to season 2 of For All Mankind, which I'm working on over at Sony. And again, similar to Nancy, season 2 was moving along swimmingly until COVID hit, and we had 8 episodes in the can. So we had to finish those 8 episodes and then kind of figure out how they were going to shoot the last 2 episodes, and then and now how we're going to finish those. So it's been an interesting ride for sure, and I think this certainly, the For All Mankind season 2 speaks to what we're talking about here today with remote workflows. So that's about it.
Very cool. James?
Hey, yeah, I'm James, co-founder of Vfx Legion, unrelated to the Legion TV show completely.
Yes.
We started in 2013 to give artists the freedom to work from wherever they wanted in the world. We built a big team, a worldwide team of all disciplines from New Zealand, South Africa, Thailand, all over the US and Canada, focusing on building teams to tackle tough projects. We worked with Blumhouse, Sony, Lionsgate, Amazon, Netflix, and we even have a few Quibi titles under our belt. So, stay tuned for those. We've worked with Blumhouse, Sony, Lionsgate, Amazon, Netflix. Did I already say those?
Yes.
Sorry, I'm reading. I wanted to write it down because I thought I'd get panicked in the moment. So for television, we worked on Scandal, How to Get Away with Murder, The Catch, Legends of Tomorrow, Flash, Batgirl, Eye Candy, Revolution. We put our focus on the artists. Just the whole idea that I had in the beginning was that you didn't need to be in a facility to work. So it was just the idea that you could have high quality visual effects controlled by a central core of producers and coordinators that were located in a facility and now aren't because of COVID. But the artists were spread all over the planet. Work cycles were 24 hours a day. I'd wake up in the morning and be looking at shots from all over the place. 20, 30 shots would come in by the time I woke up in the morning. So we were sort of COVID resistant from the beginning, but there has been just challenges of not being in the office with people, with coordinators and producers talking all the time. That was a big change.
Gotcha. Very interesting. And actually, so that's what I would like to move into next is I want to know how each of you approach doing media review. And I'm actually interested in starting out with James, just because, the nature of Legion is that you guys are, started out as just remote in general, like you were just saying. So can you tell me a bit about the process of working that way and kind of how you've built this pipeline for media review at your studio?
Yeah, we've used a lot of tools over the years. We've used, RV just internally in the studio to look at things. We've used Zoom to look with other artists. We use Discord to communicate with the artists and do reviews. We've cinesynced on the client side to get feedback and to draw up on the frames and stuff like that. Other times we'll use some other project management software that allows you to share a screen and look and paint and leave notes. I think we've done just about everything over the years to try and find a pattern, a workflow that works.
Gotcha. How does that contrast with you, Barbara, and coming from a pipeline on a workflow that was in-house before lockdown started and now has shifted?
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely a shift. I mean, all of a sudden we were, we had offices at Sony, we were working on the stage, we were still in production. And so, we were kind of all working and, if we needed a review, we would go over to editorial, and then all of a sudden it just stopped. And so it was trying to figure out how to work within that. So there was the editorial part of it. which took some time because everybody obviously was working at home and had to get the drives, and they were, used to working on a server. But from a visual effects standpoint, it was actually pretty simple. I mean, we're a small team. There's a supervisor, myself, and 2 coordinators. And we were already using a project pipeline kind of management to track shots and things like that. And so, and not just a plug, but we had already had a CineSync license, and we purchased more CineSync licenses because we knew that in addition to the coordinators and myself and the producers and editorial, that there were going to be a lot of people involved in these reviews. And then it was just coming up with a way of how were we going to be able to share the shots that we had during producer reviews. We kind of already had a system in place of how we were going to review shots, how the supervisor was going to review shots. It was really more challenging to figure out how we were going to expand that to the producers so that they could see the shots and weigh in. And that, took a little bit of time. But, with CineSync and, some other tools, we were able to do that. Everything takes a little bit longer, because you've got to download it and then, upload it and then download it and email out. And so it takes a little bit longer, but it didn't take long for us to get into a groove, certainly. And then once that kind of happened, then it all kind of fell into place, and it works pretty smoothly, actually. I mean, so much so that I went to Sony and I was like, visual effects doesn't need an office ever again. Like, we're good. We can stay remote. So, and they were actually pretty thrilled to hear that. So,
Gotcha.
yeah, so it all worked pretty well.
Very interesting. And so when lockdown started, you mentioned that you still had 2 episodes to shoot of For
Yes.
All Mankind. Is that correct?
Exactly. Yeah.
You mentioned that it took a little bit of time. What was that transition like? When pandemic hits, lockdown happens, and you now have 2 episodes that you need to complete.
Well, the good thing is that we had 8 episodes that had been shot, and had pretty much 6 of them were locked and already in progress, and 2 of them were just in the process of being locked. And so from a visual effects standpoint, we had plenty to do and plenty to keep going. To keep us busy, which, again, incredibly grateful, knock wood, that, I was able to remain employed during that time when a lot of people were out of work. So I'm really grateful for that. But we had enough work that we were able to do that. And I would say that once we figured out our system, which didn't really take very long because the tools were kind of already there, the biggest hiccup was just working with our vendors and watching them get up to speed in terms of working remotely, right? And so I would say overall, generally, there was like a 4-week delay. Like, I went to Sony and Apple and said, look, this is going to put us back at least 4 weeks from what you were planning. So just calculate that into your plan. And so, the vendors needed about 4 weeks to kind of get up and running and figure out, how they were going to work. But everyone, I would say every single vendor that we were working with, like, stepped up, and they kind of had like a plan in place. It didn't take long for them to put it into effect at all, which helped us immensely.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Nancy, how about you? You were in the middle of production of Bill and Ted. This all happens. How were you approaching just media review before, and then how did you adapt after lockdown hit?
Well, being on the production side, we normally work out of editorial with the director, and we have weekly, sometimes bi-weekly, sometimes even daily reviews with the vendors. And so from that perspective, nothing really changed. The only thing was that the supervisor, myself, my coordinator, and my visual effects editor, we were all in our houses, as was our director, as was our producers, as was our DP. Everyone was scattered. So the change, of course, was every single household coming together every day for a series of reviews with our 4 vendors, and sort of managing that process. But it wasn't a foreign concept, because as an on a producing side, I'm very used to having to organize a process that could involve 12 to 20 companies worldwide. And how do you get the review process to work on a daily basis? The only difference was that instead of having a group of people like the director, the core creatives in one particular place, they were scattered. So it just increased the level of coordination that needed to happen. And thankfully, Cinesync, not trying to plug you or anything, but Cinesync is fabulous. We moved quite quickly to Frankie, because Frankie you didn't have to have the constant loading, everybody having to download it onto their computer. We could all work from a remote location very easily. We could, as shots were coming off the pipeline, facilities were saying, oh, we got one more, which was very advantageous, that we could just all look at those shots and review them very, very quickly. So we moved to the remote production pipeline rather quickly. Like Barbara said, our vendors ours took about 2 or 3 weeks to get all their machines at home and get all their software and their internet and everything all working. But I would say, we probably lost a month as well in production. We probably lost more than a month, actually, because in the process of reviewing shots, it definitely slowed down the process, the progress we were making. Just because on any given day, someone might have missed a deadline, the director's internet didn't work, the producers couldn't log in. I mean, there was always some technical difficulty that had to be sort of dealt with on a daily basis, which slowed us down. But, I just consider it, I'm just thankful we actually got to finish the movie in great shape, and all our vendors, did great work, and they were very pleased with the results. We unfortunately lost a vendor along the way. It was just too much for them, the extension and the COVID, and they actually even lost a person, to COVID. One of the facilities did. So it was it was not a happy time. It was, it was very painful. But, and every day was, every day was Tuesday. It was the same day every day, Groundhog Day, every day. We just seemed to be looking over and over and over again at shots and making incremental progress until finally. But one of the other things that was kind of interesting was the whole DI remote process. So we did our entire DI remotely, which was kind of an interesting, I'd never done that before, but with the help of technology as well. Streambox was the software that we were able to use. But I agree with Barbara. I think the process, the remote working methodology is a really great one. And I really don't want to see us going back to everyone. And I have a lot of reasons I would share with you.
Exactly.
But I don't want us to go back to that old model.
Sure, and we'll get to those, yeah.
I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah, James, I see you smiling as soon as Nancy said that, wanting nobody to go back. See you.
Well,
yes.
that was the idea in the first place. Although I do miss a little camaraderie for sure. I mean, that's the one thing that's a little harder to come by on Discord, because you're typing your notes in to talk to people. But we jump on video calls and stuff like that, and we chat. I don't think I spend nearly as much time on Zoom as a lot of people do. I notice some of my compatriots in other companies and other facilities are like Zooming all day long. And I think we're fortunate that we get away from that, because we had this kind of infrastructure built already to do the the remote model. So we use text tools like Discord, and you can drop annotated frames up on it and look at it, and artists can send you their lighting renders and say, hey, what do you think about this? And you can just kind of approve it instantly without needing a lot of other tools, and it's free. So fits the
Sure.
budget.
So I'm interested in kind of in line with the same question that I asked Nancy and Barbara. How did it impact once lockdown happened? What was the impact like over at Legion with working with vendors and artists who maybe have to adapt? Was there kind of a production time impact for you guys?
So we kept on going sort of as normal. The editorial faced, the same hurdles that Barbara was talking about, where, they had to get the machines to people's houses, and they had to, and the AEs were completely overloaded on doing their stuff. They started having to take everything and upload it for the directors and the creatives to see. We were working on the Welcome to Blumhouse, those 3 or 4 movies that just came out recently. And those were all, and those are almost all done during COVID. They locked down. The first movie we were working on was when the lockdown happened, and we needed to get into the school that is featured at the end of one of the movies, where a woman's standing up on a roof and looking down into the quad, and no one had ever shot that because that was a late editorial ad. So we sent our coordinator over with a drone, and he went about a mile away, flew into the school that was empty. I mean, all the schools were closed. Went in, got the angle we wanted to get source material for the matte painter. And then brought it back, and we gave it to the matte painter, who then, did all their stuff and extended the backgrounds the way they needed to be. But I mean, those are some of like the production challenges, is you just can't do, I mean, you still have a hard time with it, but at the time, at the very beginning of March, mid-March, you can go anywhere, you can do anything. So that was a big challenge. And then again, just the whole post side, of which because we're a vendor, so we're sort of on our own side. But watching the whole post side sort of go apart and try and build a new way of working that gets you to do editorial feedback and director feedback, and then they take the builds and they send them off to Amazon to get reviews, or Blumhouse to get reviews. And it was a longer process. Everything took a little bit longer. We lost India for a while because we do use we have a company there that does some paint and roto for us, and they were completely down for easily 3 weeks, if not a month. And then when they came back at half strength. So all those little things slowed down. It's just weird. It's weird. I felt like we were built to take it, but the rest of the industry wasn't. And
Sure.
that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It requires, I think, definitely some creative solutions, right? And so kind of like what you said about having to just grab a drone and like go grab the shot that you needed, in a kind of a different way. So that's actually something that I'd like to explore, and I'd like to open it to all of you. Were there any creative solutions that you had to come up with, in your pipeline, or just to get things done that you would have been easy to do before all this happened, but now you have to, figure out how to do it in a different way because of the pandemic?
I mean, I don't know if throwing more money at something is a creative solution.
It's a solution.
But it is a solution. But similar to what James described, we had, our show is about space. And so we had planned on scanning all of the spacesuits, all the different spacesuits that we use, so that we had them when and if we needed any CG characters. And of course, we were scheduled to scan on Friday the 13th, which we all know what happened there.
Yeah.
So we wound up going into lockdown, and we didn't have any scans of any of our astronaut suits. And so it was really challenging to try to negotiate with Sony and get on the lot, and but what we were able to do was we were able to not get the suits themselves, but we were able to at least get the helmets, because we were doing a lot of visor replacement. And so I had to go to the lot, meet up with a costume person, get the helmets, take them to our scanning vendor, and then they spent a couple of days with them, and then we had to pick them back up and return them to Sony. So we had to so rather than do the whole thing as one, we did the helmets, and then we just had to pay them to be able to just model and texture the uniforms without a scan. Which, back in the day, I mean, people used to do that all the time. You didn't have scans. So, it's possible, but it was just more expensive. So that was definitely I guess, partially creative solution.
Sure.
But yeah, it was challenging for sure.
Definitely. Anything like that happen over in the production you're working on, Nancy?
Well, I was just thinking, you know, we did a Kid Cudi concert, you know, 5 days into COVID, which was a challenge but fortunately we got it done before the whole sort of restrictions with masks and everything. But of course it was very limited. We could only have so many cameras. They had to be such a, you know, certain distance away from each other. Everybody had, you know, it was really super complicated. But we managed to get that. The unfortunate part was that at the end of Bill and Ted, when they finished shooting in Louisiana, they had left, you know, a few pages of pickups. And as we were sort of progressing through, we didn't do the pickups right away because we thought, well, maybe we're going to lose those shots. Maybe those sequences aren't going to be in. But of course, you know, Murphy's Law. Yeah. If you need it and you don't have it, they want it. So then we had to, you know, shoot Dave Grohl's house separately, you know, as a very separate shoot. We had to shoot, for some reason, they, I wasn't there the first, you know, month of shooting, and they forgot to shoot some plates for some shots. And so I had to hire a separate crew in Louisiana in the middle of Mardi Gras / lockdown to go around and shoot plates of streets that hadn't been picked up. So that was a little complicated.
Sure.
We were lucky that you know, we had this wonderful company come in, DDI, and they did all the scans of all of our characters and our robot suits and everything. So we had all that, which was great. And so, you know, we just had to call them up and say, can you process it? So that was good. But you know, like, that's how it goes with every film, that there's some kind of intrinsic, we had a whole bunch of shots that we hadn't planned for. That the director, of course, came up with for the ending. But fortunately, I had Bill George, who was this absolutely wonderful visual effects supervisor from ILM, and he designed all these shots, and Mel's was able to build them out of nothing, with no elements, nothing. They just built them, and they look great. And so that was cool.
Gotcha.
But you know, I mean, like any typical production, when you overrun by months, you know, money's an issue.
Right.
The bond company, you know, steps in. The studio steps in. You know, I had to laugh at one point. There was, you know, some of our CineSync sessions, you know, had 14 people, 15 people. You know, the directors, the 3 producers, you know, the editor, the DP, the supervisor, me, my coordinator, the visual effects editor, the studio, the bond company. I mean, it just was a friggin' free-for-all. And, you know, and back in the early days of Zoom, children, dogs, you know, someone's making a smoothie in the background. You know, it's the whole sort of trying to get something done with everyone being in their own personal home, I thought was like an incredible challenge that in and of itself. Because, you know, like everyone else was stuck in the same house too, you know, like you can't make the kids go away. You can't make the wife or the husband go away, or the significant other. So it was I think that was one of our biggest challenges, but it was also one of the best things that happened, because I think what it did for visual effects is it made it really show that visual effects people are real people. We're not these group of people that you just hit a button and we make all this wonderful stuff happen, and we're some kind of robots that know how to do all this stuff if we work 20 hours a day. It really humanized the process, and there was a deeper, I think what came out of it was a deeper appreciation for all the hard work that people in our industry put in to what they do and how they accomplish it. And I think the other thing that was really interesting was that people, you know, everyone has their own cycle. physical cycle. You know, some people work better in the middle of the night, some early in the morning, some midday. You know, everyone has their thing, and they all have to work their thing around all their other people and other things that they have going on. And I think working remotely really made it possible for each individual to kind of make the system work for their own personal timeframes. And that was kind of interesting. And I also enjoyed the fact that I didn't have to make sure that everyone was fed every day at lunch because they were at home.
The smaller things,
You know?
right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm interested actually in some of you were talking about, you know, like having a review with 13 to 15 people in there, quite a challenge. And actually, I think all of you, while you were talking about some of the challenges that this has presented, mentioned coordination as being a huge, you know, kind of huge thing to get over when you're trying to coordinate a lot more people being part of this reviews. So, Barbara, can you tell us a little bit about how you approach that?
Yeah. So when we started, and we started to sort of, well, there were two kind of reviews for us, right? There's the supervisor review of the individual shots that come in and get submitted. And we were in the midst of 6 episodes at the time, getting ready to turn over 7 and 8. So it was, there was a lot to do because we needed to do, you know, Zoom meetings for kickoffs along with CineSync, with vendors, but then we also had to review shots via CineSync with vendors to kind of give notes. For the most part, the supervisor, Jay Red, that I work with, is very, very meticulous about annotating and putting notes into our project pipeline. So, so he really took a lot of time doing that. So from the vendor review side, it wasn't as challenging, and it wasn't as difficult, you know, but thank God for Zoom and CineSync is all I have to say for that. When it came time to reviewing more internally with the producers, that became more of a challenge because, to Nancy's point, like all of a sudden everybody was in the review, you know, like everybody in editorial who normally wouldn't need to be in the visual effects review would want to be a part of it. One, because they had nothing else to do because they were just at home not doing anything, and two, because, you know, all of a sudden it kind of took on that kind of importance. And so we, you know, we needed to increase our license. I mean, we went from having, you know, a normal CineSync license, you know, with like 5 users to 15 to accommodate everybody who needed to be on. And it just was the cost of doing business, you know, but that's just what we had to do so that everybody could kind of see it. And once we got that, you know, it was pretty, we actually, unlike, I think what Nancy had mentioned, what we were concerned about, which we're rethinking about for season 3, but, you know, everybody's bandwidth, their individual home local bandwidth became kind of an issue. And so like, I luckily, watch, I'll crash in the middle of this, but I luckily not would have had like no problem with my internet and it like my downloads and uploads, but like one of the, like the supervisor lives out in Joshua Tree. Okay, well, he has really crappy internet out there. And so, you know, what would normally take 2 minutes takes 2 hours to download. So everybody's internet is different. And so their bandwidth is different. So that would impact how they were kind of able to take part in what we were doing. And so, you know, so we erred on the side of using a Sony proprietary like FTP software that allowed everybody to download everything locally, and then we would use CineSync rather than Ftrack. But although next season, I think we're gonna sort of try our hand at that. But that became a really critical way. So, you know, it was kind of a drag because we had to identify, okay, what are we going to show the EPs? We had to do that a full 24 hours before the review, have the editor put it all together, make the overcuts, make the mini cuts, upload it to our FTP, and then the supervisor needed to look at it, make sure it was okay, sign off on it, and then we had to then send out the link to everybody, like, and it just became a template after a while. And now it's like second nature, right? Here's the link of what we're reviewing. Here's the Zoom information because it's a recurring Zoom meeting. And it's super easy. So those were the two different ways. And again, once we kind of got into it, now it's like nothing, it's really easy and it works really well. So
yeah, and I'm interested. You both mentioned that you have a lot more people in these reviews as well. So has it changed has that had any ramifications? Like maybe you're getting a lot more feedback at a time than you were before. Has that had any kind of waterfall effects in the rest of the pipeline?
I haven't seen. I'm sorry, Nancy. We haven't seen that on our end.
Okay.
No, it's still pretty streamlined.
What I found annoying, and I'll be honest, I hope no one that is involved is on this call, but what I found annoying is that if you had like 15 potential people that would be on a CineSync, and for whatever reason they would miss a CineSync or two in the week or in the day or as at whatever the schedule, and then all of a sudden out of the blue from nowhere would come this critique of a shot that we had passed by the director and gotten his approval to move forward on, and then an unknown titled person would then say, oh, but I don't like the spaceship there, and I don't like the color of that floor. And that really was probably the worst part of trying to move things forward. Because there was this constant, people on different, because the directors and the producers would see everything every day, multiple times a day. But the rest of the entourage, they would sort of come and go based on their schedules. And then they would, put in their personal opinions about things. And, when you're trying to drive 500 shots, I mean, when we showed the movie on March 11th, we had no finals. Everything was a temp. And we were supposed to be finished a month later.
Wow.
So, of course, we didn't finish till June 19th. Of course, but so I'm there as this taskmaster driving these shots through the pipeline. My coordinator and we are just being, hell bent on getting these shots in front of the director, getting comments, getting things done, moving things forward. And so to have these kind of backtracks, taking 3 steps forward, moving 5 steps back. That was the worst part, because if we had been in a room together, well, first of all, a lot of those people would never have bothered to come to editorial and be in the
exactly.
room.
Yeah, exactly.
But because they were remote and they could do it, then they were involved, and they were also super keen. But if we had been in a room in editorial and we were all there together face to face, no one would say nasty things. Everyone would have been a lot more genteel. And we would have gotten farther faster. There's no question about it. The remoteness of it and everyone having to have a thing to say was just a little, it dragged down the whole process.
That's actually really interesting. Working with artists and vendors and people in production, what has been kind of some of the biggest differences of interfacing mainly through webcam and Zoom as opposed to being in the studio and like interfacing directly and like having these meetings face to face? Have you guys found any kind of big differences aside from people just maybe putting feedback out there that they would not have when they were in person?
I think, for me, my biggest issue, honestly, is having to interact with editorial and their limitations, because they are also spread out, right? As the visual effects producer and coordinator, we're so reliant on editorial to get us the most recent cuts and to have those accessible to us. When you're all in editorial together and they're right down the hall, if you want to go look at a sequence really fast, you can just walk in the room and ask them. But working remotely, you need to have everything kind of handy, locally or on some FTP so that you can look at it, because you can't always say like, hey, where's this shot again? Or, let me look at that again, or let me compare that. So, and then of course we also needed the clean version and the comp version, right? The temp comp that they had done. And so then it's like, you're asking them to output like double the amount of QuickTimes. And so for whatever reason, that became challenging for editorial to do. And so I think for us, that was the biggest challenge, is being able to get what we needed in a timely fashion without feeling like you are just making people work around the clock 24 hours a day. So that was hellish.
One of the things that sort of happened on our show was that now people who normally would be too busy to be thinking about our show, we're now thinking about our show. And so I joked that we were never going to have a lock cut before we finalized the last shot, because the cut never, ever, ever got final. It was always a work in progress cut. And so the cut was changing, even up to the last week before we delivered the last visual effects shot. The cut was still changing. And we were rearranging visual effects shots, redoing visual effects shots right up to the very last minute. That you would have been able to have stopped if you had been in a room together. That would never have happened. But because everyone now had more time on their hands than they normally do, the people that make those kind of decisions. And we had, even the writers and the actors themselves, who were also producers on the movie. We had something like 20 producers on the movie. And at any point in time, they might come in and have some issues with certain things and want things changed. And so that added a sort of another, I think because COVID hit, everyone thought, well, this is kind of an excuse for us to really, really, really drill down and make this the best product we can. And there were reasons to believe that extra money would show up because of insurance, whatever. And so there was this sort of, I really felt that, we made about 6 Bill and Teds. You guys only got to see the last one, but yeah, there were many, many, many sort of final versions that just kept getting worked on and worked on again. And maybe that's a good thing, because now, because the other thing was, when COVID hit, there was only so much product that had gotten shot and was in the post process. So a lot of those, executives and things, they would have been busy shooting their next project or their next 2 projects, the next 3 projects. And because shooting was shut down, they were focused on the 1 or 2 projects that they had that was in the post pipeline. So that was a real interesting part of the process.
Absolutely. James, seems like you had some thoughts on this as well.
I can agree with all of these. The focusing on the shots and shows and adding shots without budget to go with it, super common. We're working on a show right now that's in 911, but they're still at 48 frame handles on front and back. So a 24 frame shot.
Oh my God, that should be outlawed.
Frames, right? So we started passive aggressively just putting the work into 8 frame handles into the whole clip. So it'll be like nothing, 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 effect. Nothing, 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 nothing. And no one said anything, no one's noticed. But it's it's all the same things. It's it's shot count. It's more time to focus on things. Production still isn't picking up very much here in Los Angeles for the creatives that are here. So they're still, playing around with things. And the only thing that actually, I think, stops them is the idea that that they're going to air it. Like, so our shows go to Amazon. So, we're not waiting for a theater chain to open back up or a worldwide release. We have a date that Amazon wants to air it. So those shows definitely have to, they have to put a pin in it. So,
Right.
but they were definitely driving the creative when it was an open schedule too. At the very beginning of this, it was like, well, we don't know when anything's going to happen. We don't know when we're going to get back to shoot the last week of, one of the shows. So because of that, they're just like, well, let's fiddle around with this. Let's see what we can do. Let's see how much better we can make it for the exact same money.
Exactly.
And when you're on our side, you're like, well, I hope we get more PPP loans from the government so we can keep going. Because we still have to pay people. It's very interesting.
Absolutely.
Yeah, well, we luckily did not have that. I'm very grateful. Like they didn't keep going back and opening up the cuts and doing that. It was like the shots, they were locked and we just moved forward. Yeah, thank God I didn't have that, because that sounds like
good discipline. I like that.
Nightmare. Yeah.
No, absolutely. I think, absolutely a huge challenge. I'm in the video game industry, right? And I'm seeing it as well. I'm seeing other departments that are now very invested in the project that, or are part, or, different departments, parts of the project that were not before. And it's because I think, now that we're at home, right? Everybody's just constantly thinking. I'm constantly just thinking about the project, thinking about everything, when I'm not here. And it's because I think also the accessibility, just be able to jump on the computer and, put in a little bit of work here and there.
Yeah, I think that's a really big thing. I think that hit everyone on a personal level, right? And it took time to just kind of educate everyone on that, like, yes, you're at home, but there's still a work day. Mm-hmm. And, just because you're home doesn't mean, and you're working from home doesn't mean that you're working all the time.
All day.
And so, we on For All Mankind, we were lucky because we still had plenty of time to kind of deliver, and we didn't really have a delivery date. I mean, we did, but we didn't, because we knew there were 2 episodes that were missing. So it was kind of up in the air. But we really tried very hard to kind of manage that. And, like the whole visual effects team kind of agreed that, like, we weren't going to get on our phones or text each other or answer emails before 9 o'clock. And that if you did, that was okay, but don't expect a response from anyone, if you choose to do that for yourself. And the same thing with, like, at 6:30, 7 o'clock, it was like, okay, pencils down, we're done for the day.
Wow.
And so, it was hard, because on top of that, then you have people who, just emotionally were like, I mean, COVID, that lockdown, and like everything was happening, and people's families and friends were getting sick. And so, like, there were some people that were kind of like a mess, and they'd be like, oh my God, I can't work today. And I'm like, all right, we still have to get shit done. Like, we still have to go. So, there was that, that kind of dichotomy of, like, feeling that, letting yourself feel the frustration of the moment and what was happening, on top of, like, oh yeah, we still have to get this done and deliver. So, I felt like oftentimes, I had to put my therapist hat on for people, and
Sure.
kind of talk them off the ledge.
Absolutely. And I'm interested to bring it back to just kind of media review and now I have my alert set up on the phone, and I'm getting pinged anytime, one of my vendors submits new assets, and there's this kind of just desire to jump right in and open that email and start writing notes on what we're receiving. James, how do you approach that? Just kind of that constant, you work at a studio that technically, I mean, it's 24 hours because you're around the globe.
Right.
So
yeah.
How do you approach that over at Legion?
Well, I stop when I go to sleep. I wake up first thing in the morning and start reviewing shots, and I go to bed, either telling people in other countries, in South Africa or whatever, some ideas of how they could make their shots better. But it's, I mean, and I love Barbara's idea, and I think our head of production also loves Barbara's idea. And he's like, I'm not going to answer an email before 9:30 in the morning, and I'm done at like 6 or 7. And that's cool. But I mean, internally though, I mean, dealing with the artist, dealing with review, dealing with all that sort of stuff, it's not the outside client that's really the problem. Although we did have a post super who would email us at like 4 in the morning with like thoughts and budget updates. And She's like, well, what do you think about this? It's like, well, we think it's 4 a.m. You should go to sleep. But no, I get it. But I'm kind of on the clock all the time, and that's just part of being, you know, a co-owner of a facility that's at the moment super busy because of stuff going on. But yeah, there were some weeks there where it was like it's slow, there's a lockdown, the cut's sort of in flux, and everyone else is getting all this time off, but I'm not getting any time off. And it was weird to watch the world shut down and still be like, why am I doing 60 hours a week when the whole world shut down right now? Why can't I get a break? So I wanted that to be my vacation. And it wasn't.
And then of course you have the concept of, you know, where your facilities are or where your people are in the world. They're all on different time zones depending if you're, you know, so you have to remain somewhat flexible because you know, particularly India is problematic in my brain because, you know, they're 12 and a half hours off of us. So no matter what you do, it's the middle of the night.
They've been like, yeah, our company's been very flexible about, I don't know when they sleep because I know there's only like 2 point people for us. And, but they will get back to us within an hour or two regardless. And I don't expect anything until like, you know, 6 at night really, but you know, we'll send a note saying, you know, we've got some shots coming to bid. Can you, you know, take a look at them? And 4 in the afternoon, 5 in the afternoon.
Yeah, there's always that, you know, you're in the middle of dinner and then ping, 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 ping. You know, somebody wants to talk about something and it's really, really super important. And then, we should also talk about the language of it. The language problems that go on with the, you know, we're all here speaking English, but the rest of the world, you know, has many languages. And, you know, 2 of my vendors were French. And, you know, and we had to, you know, there was issues a little bit, you know, with conversation and understanding and different terminology and words. And thankfully, we're a visual industry so that we can draw and paint and we can show our work on it. But with language, I mean, that's another whole level, especially remotely, you know. When you're in the same room, somehow you can read people's eyes and their hands are moving and you can get what they're, you know, trying to say to you and all that kind of stuff. But in this remote sort of application, especially with technology as it is, languages can make it difficult.
Absolutely. I think, you know, one of the biggest things is what you just mentioned, you know, the not being present, you know, in the same space. A lot of that, you know, kind of like, the details, the minute, you know, little expressions and things get lost. And so what I found personally is there's been a need to be more specific, more detailed in explanations, you know, to the people that you're working with, whether it's in your team or whether it's a vendor, you know, halfway around the world. I found that a lot of things are just kind of, you know, maybe falling through the cracks or not being understood unless it is explicitly you know, detailed and explained. Have you guys found the same, you know, since kind of lockdown started and your artists have gone home?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I would say that we've had to take much more, we have to be so much more clear about what it is that we mean and what we're trying to say and what we're asking for or what we're saying. And, you know, and you're having to over explain a lot, but I think that, you know, you're communicating so much through email, the thread could be like, you know, 25 deep. So you have to kind of keep reiterating what you're talking about because, you know, people aren't going to necessarily scroll and then there's all this back and forth. And so there were a couple of times that we were like, okay, everybody, this is how we need to communicate because there's just too much going back and forth. And so, you know, and just the reply all was, you know, a problem too. So, yeah, I think the communication was key. And that's why like tools, and again, not to plug, but like CineSync was so helpful because you could draw. There was a visual representation of what you were talking about that people could, and you could save it, and you could, you could reference back to it. And it was just so useful because it was sort of, again, that visual representation of what you were talking about, rather than like in an email, like, it's so easy to kind of, what my vernacular meant by that is different from what someone else's vernacular might mean by that. So it was challenging for sure.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good thing to point out is, that's I think one of the biggest things that, media review software like CineSync and Ftrack obviously are providing us right now, is that ability to visually communicate. So I'd actually like to get your thoughts on that specifically, kind of the importance of that media review process to the productions that you're working on.
I would say, like, just from our perspective, I mean, it's in a lot of ways, it's the same thing. Artists don't always take away from what you're saying. And even if you're drawing on the screen, they don't always walk away. They don't hear what you're saying. They've got their mind thinking about like how they're going to do it or whatever, and what the end result is. And as a creative director, I've got like this kind of, I know what I want to see at the end of the day, but sometimes there's like this communication breakdown, and the benefits of things like CineSync, but also CineSync saving out, the reference material, and to go back and, say, no, not this, refer to that. The headlights were going this way, not this way. And there were arrows in the drawing. So, and it's a great way to call back information when it seems to have fallen through the cracks, which is definitely something that happens more with COVID, because we didn't have as many problems before COVID. I just think people not being able to get out of the house, not being able to get away from the work, get away from outside of the context of the work. They tend not to, I don't know, a lot of people are having like memory issues with just being, because you're never changing your space, right? You're always in the same space. So like when I was working with Barbara at Zoic or something, I'd be in a room, we'd say something, and we were in that room, and I remember being in the room and saying something. So when I had to go back and do something else later, I remember, oh, I was in this room and I heard her say blah, blah. So we do that. But now it's like, I'm in this space. I'm always in this space. I've always made a note from this space. And so there's no difference for you to trigger your brain. So that's where like the tools, the review tools, and the like making annotations and making detailed annotations, and maybe even typing into it if you can, makes a lot of sense, and is very helpful in this day and age.
What James just said there is the reason why I fought to bring on Bill George from ILM as a creative consultant, because I realized that everyone using words was not working, and that what we needed a strong because our director, who knew what he wanted, but he was a very verbal guy, not a artist kind of guy. I thought, well, we needed the translation from the director through something to the visual effects companies. And Bill, being a really strong painter, he came on in January or February, and we fed him like key shots from each of the sequences. And then what he did was he talked to the director, Dean Parasil. They had worked together on Galaxy Quest. And so they had this really great relationship, which is also very key, that your director and your supervisor have a sort of shorthand with each other. Anyway, Bill would then take Dean's comments and he would paint these frames. He would do paint overs of all of these frames. He would get them approved by Dean. And then we would set up, we'd set up Frankie. I hope you guys like Frankie. I love Frankie. Frankie's my favorite over CineSync even. But we would set up these Frankie sessions, and we would go through all of Bill's paintings, and then it clicked. It was amazing, the difference between using words versus using paintings to actually describe. And Bill would say to the vendors, no, the light is coming from over here and it's affecting things over here. And they'd be like, oh yeah, now we get it. It was an integral part of us actually getting the shots completed to, in a great way. Because, when you shoot a film against green, there's nothing. There's nothing. There's an element that you pull, and then you're responsible for putting everything else in. So that it's not like you get a lot of direction from the shoot in terms of what it's ultimately going to look like. And the way we worked on Bill and Ted, our production designer had her, for whatever reason, she had her hands full with what she was building and didn't do any conceptual designs or anything for post. So we needed that connection in post between what the director had in his head and how to communicate it to our vendors. It was really, really super keen. It was super needed. And Cinesync and Frankie and Zoom were the conduits for us being able to provide those kind of really artistic notes,
Absolutely. Definitely. And so what actually I would like to do is ask you about where you think, the industry is headed. I think we've all, after, lockdown and everything, the industry has made quite a shift, right? That I think is going to reverberate through, many, years in the future now. So where do you think the industry is headed, and what would you like to see the future of media review be? So with these softwares, what would you like to see? How would you like to see it evolve, basically, over the next few years? Barbara, start with you.
So, look, I think that it's going to be really hard to put this toothpaste back in the tube, right? Like, I think that it's people they know the tools are out there. They know they can do it. The whole idea that you just have to be sitting in some office just because everybody else is, I think that ship has sailed, and that's done. And by the way, I'm speaking from as a production side person, not as a facility person anymore, because when I was at a facility, I could never imagine this remote workflow ever. Like, my imagination just would not even allow, because I was so mired in you have to be in the same room, everybody needs to be together to kind of see what's happening. So I feel like I can't even really speak to the vendor side of things. But from the production side, I can say that like I said, I just don't think you're ever going back to what it was before. And I think when it comes to the media review tools, I would love to use Frankie next season. But again, it becomes everybody's bandwidth is different, right? And so we're always worried about that, which is why we prefer Cinesync, because you know that everybody has the information locally, and so you can have it. There's security concerns with that we kind of bypass because of COVID. So, we'll have to work those things out. But, if there was a combination of both of them, that would be great. And then certainly having to upload the material, and this really only happens with Cinesync. We have to upload the material somewhere for everybody to be able to download it and then use Cinesync. So if we could cut out that middleman, that would be amazing. I would love that. I'd be really happy.
Definitely. James?
The future, I don't know. That's kind of a tough one.
Yeah.
Some of the things that we tried in the past, I felt like were sort of the future. And it was, to Barbara's point about the up and down for Cinesync, was one of the solutions we had early on. And I see people's questions about privacy and exclusivity of work.
We'll get to those, yeah.
Very early on, though,
Yeah.
We used BitTorrent made a sync product that could sync around multiple machines. And so the idea was that we were actually, and now Media Shuttle has something similar and it's much more secure, but the idea is that you could sync the work around, at least in terms of the artist side. And when you wanted to pull something out to review it, it's like, it just knows the file structure. They have a mirrored file structure to what we have at the office, and everything always works everywhere. And you can do this in remoting in or whatever, but it's the ability to pull up full res stuff, 2K footage without doing the DNX encoding, or the Ftrack has a pretty good encoder, but it's the idea that like everybody has ready access to all of the projects, all of the software, and all the things at all the time. The only problem with this is the client side. If they get too inside the facility, it turns into a nightmare because they know too much, and you don't want them to know too much. Yeah. I mean, there's 100 reasons why that doesn't work, but yeah, the future is just going to be about streaming the content where it needs to go, and people having enough bandwidth to handle it. Burbank, we got 400 down, 30 up on a regular, spectrum. Our guys up in BC they all have gig fiber. So, gig up, gig down. They can do anything they want. They can watch anything, stream anything. And, then we got the guy in South Africa who's on 4G, or he's on LTE connection, which is pretty fast, but I mean, it's still, he's got to download 4K plates, and it does take a little while. And the New Zealanders were on 3G. When we started the company, we had a pod in New Zealand, and they were literally paying per megabyte to get plates down and send plates back up through Aspera at the time. So, I mean, it's a crazy thing, but I think it's about, AWS is integrating a lot of things where you can have just your whole show and workstations on AWS. You can connect to that. You can review from that. It's probably out of our price range as a small to midland facility, but yeah, it's just about streaming, man.
Sure. Yeah, that connection. Yeah.
Can I throw my 2 cents in on that?
Absolutely, please.
Do a whole dollar.
I totally agree with both Barbara and James, everything they said. For me, I think the future, so up until now, the onus has been on us, the user, to cobble together, to go to all these individual vendors and to cobble together something that works as a system for us, for our particular project. And, and of course you establish relationships, over time, but one of the frustrating things about it is that's not our focus. I'm a visual effects producer. I have, 12 to 20 companies worldwide that I'm trying to get to do shots, and I'm trying to pump them through a pipeline. And I got a director and a producer who are yelling at me. I got an editorial team I got to deal with. I got art directors and DPs, and I don't have time to figure out the production pipeline in terms of, and nor does my visual effects supervisor either. They don't have time to integrate. I guess for me, the future is integration. We have some very, very smart people who have done some incredible, they have incredible tools, and there are these incredible tool kits that are made available to us. But it seems like the onus is on us to figure out how to take all of these tools, integrate them, and make them into a useful production pipeline. I think the future is somebody taking the reins. And, I think Ftrack is in a good place, to be honest. I don't own any shares in Ftrack, so I can say this, but you've just bought Cinesync, and you have Cinesync and Frankie, and you have Studio, and you have these bits and pieces, just like Autodesk, they have Photoshop, and they have this and they have that, and you can, if you go to these various companies, you can get pieces of the puzzle, and then we do the integration. I would love to see somebody sometime soon, and I think the future is right now, with all of us working remotely, to spend some real serious time providing to us an integrated system. And, you know, I've had friends who used to be visual effects producers who they developed their own system. Jenny Foley years ago had her system. Ms. Cox, I've forgotten her first name all of a sudden, Joyce Cox, she had developed her own sort of production management system. There's been all these production management systems that have been sort of developed and come and gone and never really been accepted. But I think that's, for me, that would be the best thing ever. If I could rely on somebody to come and provide us with a package that we could just use from the beginning to the end of production.
Absolutely.
Okay, that's it. That's my 2 cents.
I'll take seed money to help develop that. Anyone?
There you go. I
Well,
mean,
I
don't
think-
you think
yeah.
Sandhill somewhere, venture capitalists somewhere should, if they could hear us asking for these things, you know,
Right.
they could invest in it, and there we go.
Absolutely, and I think, you know, there's multiple companies, and obviously, you know, Ftrack being a big one there, kind of moving hopefully in that direction. So I think there'll be a lot happening, especially as we just get deeper and deeper into the remote workspace, and you know, things play out over the next, you know, couple of years. I think we'll see a lot of innovation in that space for sure. So what I'd like to do now is we have just over 15 minutes left, so I would actually like to go over into the Q&A section. We have some really good questions from the audience today, so I am hoping that we'll be able to get to all of them with the time that we have left. So let's see here. The first one we have is from Caro. How do you review large shot volumes, you know, between 30 to 50 shots a day with high bit depth color imagery, 16-bit AXR multi-layers without issues?
You don't. I mean,
Good answer.
in our system, we get between 20 and 30 shots in a day uploaded from artists as EXR that for QC is downloaded by somebody with a gig line who goes and pixel checks every single shot. And, you know, how do you review that as 16-bit multi-layer EXRs? I mean, 40 gig fiber cards to any machine are super prohibitively expensive, and that's what you would need to stream that sort of information. So I don't know how there's a realistic way to do that outside of a facility situation with like a screening room.
Gotcha.
Yeah. You don't, but we move that kind of volume around, but to like sit and have multiple, and everybody has access to it, right? So anyone, if it goes into like a delivery folder in our system, like a submission folder of EXRs, anyone in the company can download it, or we submit it, they can download it. Then you can, you know, if they can play that back, they can load it up and play it back, then sure, you could review it, but it does mean moving the physical media around. I don't know of a solution off the top of my head that allows for that kind of shot review.
Absolutely.
We don't do huge large volumes, but we will get you know, as part of the delivery, once the supervisor finals a shot, then then they submit EXRs for sort of final QC check, and that gets downloaded onto our server that he then in his home looks at the EXRs on his 4K monitor and does all of that. But you know, when one says large volumes, you know, we're not looking at like 50 shots at a time. You know, it's on a much smaller scale than that.
Gotcha.
When I hear that question, I think that's the DI process, because in film, that's how you do it. So we do low res and then high res reviews, you know, with CineSync and Frankie. But then when it comes to looking at things as EXRs, that's part of the DI process. And that's, you know, somebody like eFilm or any one of the ones that do DIs, they take on board all those EXRs. They're the ones that are putting the cut together from an EXR perspective, and then they're able with their machinery and software, etc., to provide to us through Streambox a way of viewing those EXRs in full color. a number of shots that you can process, like in a DI situation. When we were doing our DI, on a daily, every Tuesday, we would do DIs for a couple of months. And we would process probably somewhere between 60 and 90 shots on any given DI review day as EXRs.
Gotcha.
It does not work that way in television. Just
so
yeah.
There's a different industries, different answer for sure.
Yes, for sure.
All right. So from Sebastian, how do you handle privacy and exclusivity of work material in this remote era? It's a really good one.
James.
Damn it. There's a lot of different ways to handle it. It depends on the budget of the show and whether you're working on a show that has a high security framework into it. As I talked about, like the AWS systems earlier, you can be on, Amazon Central Storage, and you can tie up and have a show, have people remote in. We had people remote into the office, so the content only stays in the office. And then our third way of working, our traditional way of working, is with Media Shuttle, and the artist downloads some of the content that they need. They work on it, they upload it. It really just depends on the project. Not every project requires that level of security. And if they do, then there should be a cost associated with it, because it is, I think, way more expensive to be running, 30 or 40 virtual machines rather than controlling the, 20 machines we have in the office from remote connections. So that's how you do it.
Cool. Anything to add, Barbara or Nancy?
I mean, Sony has a, like I mentioned, a proprietary software that they use as like their FTP Aspera. And the cool thing about it is that you upload the file, and then once it lives there, you can copy it or move it to another folder. And when you share it with someone, so like say I want to send a bidding QuickTime to James, right? I would create a folder for him on this platform. And then when I share it with him, if it's only preview, if I don't want him to download it, I can share it. And this software automatically can put a burn-in on the lower third, or anywhere actually you want on the screen, wherever you want, the different opacities, locations, wherever you want, size of the font. And so when you're viewing it with a burn-in. Unfortunately, it doesn't apply when you're downloading. So if I wanted to send something to James and I wanted him to be able to download it, it wouldn't have the same burn-in. And so that's something that we're talking to them about for the future, because that would really help. It really eliminates the need for editorial to have to do that. And it gives us that extra bit of security so that everything is watermarked, and makes a huge difference. So that was something that was really helpful at the beginning of our process. But now, everybody basically needs to download everything. So it's not as useful.
Gotcha. Okay. From Charlotte here, she is asking, how does being remote affect how you manage bids and bring vendors onto the project? Has that changed in any way from the way you were doing it before?
I mean, not for me, no. I mean, I'm finding that, no. I mean, the process is pretty much the same. Nancy,
Yeah. We haven't changed the process at all. I mean, you still, no, I would say no. Okay. There's no change whatsoever. The only difficulty is now with the number of reiterations on shots. Some vendors can say, well, we only budgeted for 8 reiterations and now we're into 22, and this is all costing us too much money. You have less control remotely than you did when you were physically in editorial with your director and your producers, because you could raise the red flag, immediately in the room and get everyone to come on board, and you could say, can we curtail this discussion? Then I could bring all the key creatives together and say, look guys, we've been taking this vendor and we've been moving him here, there, and there, and there, and there, and there, and we're giving him, we're putting him in a compromised situation. It's really much more difficult now, I find, to control that sort of reiteration, note-giving process, because on any given time frame and any given email, somebody can send something out to the vendor, like directly even, or through me, or or to the director to the facility directly, and can alter the course of the production of a particular shot or sequence that has serious financial and time implications, but there's no mechanism to stop it because it's an email, right? It's already out there without having consulted, the people that try to control money and time. So that's just made things, I think, a little more difficult for the vendors. And in particular, it did happen on Bill and Ted. As I said, we lost one of our vendors, Shade Visual Effects. We lost in Santa Monica because we went over almost 3 months. And, it becomes a very dicey situation as to whose fault that is, especially in the time of COVID. The whole universe is turned upside down. How do you attribute changes? And I find, it's a very difficult process, and you have to go in there with your heart open and try to do the best you can with the visual effects facilities and try to make sure they don't get hurt in the process. Yeah.
Absolutely. We got one question here for James specifically from Sarah. When did you first decide to set up VFX Legion, and what inspired that decision?
Hi, Sarah. Thanks for asking. I grew up in Sacramento, California. It's about 5.5 hours north of here in LA. And I worked there for the first 5 years, and I came down here and worked at a company called Filmworks. They're doing super low rent direct-to-video movies. When their main project kind of folded, they picked up a couple of other smaller things, but it wasn't enough to keep me on full time in Santa Monica. So, and I had a house in Sacramento, so I went back to Sacramento. And at the time, I would double the data. I would take we'll call them DPX files for now, the main files. I would double the data. I'd keep a drive at the office, and I'd take a drive with me back up to Sacramento. And I would work in After Effects on these, and then I would transfer the project file and render it on both machines. And then I'd do a screen share and review with the director. And that was sort of like the first iteration of the idea of Legion. Then jump a few years later, I'm sort of freelancing around LA. I work for a place called Pixel Magic, who at one point we worked on a movie. They were working on a movie, but they had 60 green screen helicopter shots where we had to put the city outside the helicopter. And I wasn't working at a facility at the time, so I took the work on at home. And I cleared a lot of money doing that because, I could set up a way of working where the shots were taking me a couple hours a piece and they looked really good and everything got approved. And I just thought to myself, well, you can make a decent living doing this. It can be remote. I know what I'm doing. I have my own workflow. So I sort of took that workflow, other file and folder structures that I had worked with at other facilities, and started building my own system for doing this. And then in 2013, things slowed down at where I was working. And so I just decided at that point, like, well, let's try this. I mean, let's see if it works. So we incorporated with far too many people, but we incorporated and created a LLC. And I started working out of my backyard. I had a shed in my backyard, and I set up some machines and some storage, and we got our first Blumhouse movie called Stretch, and it was bid for 65 shots and turned into 225 shots, almost all of which needed to be turned around in 2 weeks at the very end because the Bond company was sick of waiting. And they said, okay, we found a distributor, so finish it. And they gave us 10 days to do about 200 shots. And so we proved out that you could do this sort of thing as a company. I pulled in, 15 people I knew. We all were working on it. We got it all done. The hardest part was actually QCing that volume of work with the very small pipeline I had here. At the time, I think I had 100 megabits down. So it's just like all day was just transferring. All day was transferring files, these giant DPX files, and doing the QC process, and then sending them. And then I would drive a drive to we had a place at Wilshire, and we drive a drive to Wilshire and drop it off at our office, which held our Aspera, and then we delivered from Aspera to the client. Eventually, we turned that into getting an office here in Burbank. We got our own fiber line, our own storage, our own machines, render farm, everything. People still were remote, but yeah, I just figured people could do it. I wanted artists to be able to live where they wanted to live. I didn't want to have to bring everybody into an office. I had so many people that just were burnt out. They wanted to go live in Oregon or whatever. And I also knew people around the world that wanted to work. And my job I see as a facility owner is to give artists a livelihood, doing what they want to do, where they want to do it at a fair rate, so that, you know, they make a living and I get the joy of still doing visual effects.
That's awesome. Well, super cool, guys. With that, I think we are going to end it for today. So that was a really fantastic discussion. And I would like to say huge thanks to all of our speakers today for joining us and for sharing your thoughts. There's a ton of stuff to take away here. So I'd also like to thank everybody who joined us today, everybody who's attending. I hope you got as much out of that as I did. If you'd like to learn a little bit more about remote workflows, then you can sign up for the next Ftrack webinar, Going Remote, Episodic TV VFX. In this webinar, professionals from the world of episodic TV VFX production will discuss their process and how remote work has changed things. This is going to take place on November 10th at 11 a.m. Pacific time. You can also learn more about Ftrack itself in an Intro to Ftrack Connect on the 18th of November at 11 a.m. That is going to be Central Eastern Time. During this webinar, Ftrack's in-house development and integrations expert will reveal all about Ftrack Connect, an application that helps users use Ftrack's creative plugins and to run Python scripts created using the Ftrack API. If you'd like to learn about more upcoming Ftrack webinars, you can head over to ftrack.com/webinars, where you can see what's coming on next, as well as download previous webinars. Our discussion today will be on there soon, so keep an eye on that, and we'll send you a link once that is ready. If you have any questions, sales related or otherwise, please get in touch with Ftrack's head of Sales Americas, Brian. He was here in the chat today. He'll be able to help you out with any questions you have about the software and how it works. We'll send you a post-webinar questionnaire by email at some point. Please do check your inboxes and let us know what you think if you find the time, and we'll use that information to improve our webinars in the future and make them even more beneficial to those of you who are attending. So once again, I'd like to say thank you to everybody here. Thank you guys for joining this discussion. It was awesome to get you to share your knowledge and talking to you today. So thank you, everybody. Have a great rest of your day, and hopefully we'll see you soon in the next webinar.
Thank you.
Bye, thanks. It was fun.
Thank you.